She had the perfect life on paper. A mansion in Buckhead, a Range Rover in the driveway, a husband worth $2–3 billion. But perfection, as it turned out, was just another word for a beautiful lie. His name was Marcus Adeniran, and he was a titan. At 52 years old, he had built an empire from nothing, starting as a software engineer and clawing his way up until he owned one of the largest tech and real estate conglomerates in the Southeast. Forbes called him a visionary. Bloomberg called him a genius. Atlanta society called him the most eligible and powerful man in the state. And then, in a single moment on a rain-soaked highway near the airport, everything changed. The accident happened on a Tuesday at 4:47 in the afternoon. Marcus was driving home from the airport, coming back from a corporate acquisition meeting in New York. His driver had called in sick that morning, so Marcus had driven himself, something he rarely did anymore. The road was slick. A delivery truck hydroplaned across 3 lanes. Marcus swerved to avoid it, and his Bentley crashed headfirst into a concrete barrier on the side of the highway. The impact crushed the front end of the car. The medical team said he was lucky to survive at all. But survival came at a cost. When Marcus woke up in the hospital 3 days later, he couldn't feel anything below his waist. The spinal cord damage was severe, the doctors said, the kind that doesn't heal. His legs were intact, but they were no longer his. They belonged to the injury now, to the paralysis, to the cruel mathematics of a moment that lasted less than a second, but would define the rest of his life. He was 52 years old, and he would spend it in a wheelchair. His wife, Amara, had visited him once. She came with her makeup done, her hair perfect, her designer bag coordinating with her designer shoes. She stood in the doorway of his hospital room like she was afraid the paralysis might be contagious. "Marcus, this is terrible, absolutely terrible." She had said it the way someone might say a favorite restaurant had closed down, not devastated, disappointed. Marcus had looked at her standing there in her 4-inch heels and Chanel suit, and something had shifted inside him. A door had closed, not because he was angry, but because he finally saw clearly. He saw a woman who had married him for what he could do, not who he was. He saw someone who was already calculating, already figuring out how to distance herself from the wreckage of his new reality. And it hit him like the truck that had hit his car. This was the real test, not the paralysis, her. The question was what to do about it. Marcus spent 2 weeks in the hospital thinking about his marriage, his wife, and the woman who worked in his house. Her name was Simone Baptiste, and she had been with them for 3 years. She was quiet, competent, efficient. Amara treated her the way she treated everything that didn't directly benefit her, which was to say, she barely acknowledged her existence. But Simone moved through that mansion like she owned it, not in an arrogant way, but in the way someone owns something they respect, something they care for. She kept it clean, kept it running, and did it all with a grace that suggested she understood the weight of responsibility. The plan came to Marcus fully formed one night at 3 a.m. while he was staring at the ceiling of his hospital room, and the machines around him beeped their lonely songs. He would go home. He would stay married to Amara long enough to understand her true colors, but he would also pay attention to Simone. He would watch how she treated him now that he couldn't walk. He would see who she really was in this moment when she had nothing to gain from him except the wages she earned. Because Marcus had learned something in his 52 years on this earth, something that his wealth had only reinforced. Character is revealed in moments of crisis, and it shines brightest in those places where no one is watching. When Marcus came home in a wheelchair, Amara had orchestrated a welcome that would have looked perfect in a magazine spread if anyone had been photographing it. She had hired a nurse to come during the day, arranged for a medical equipment company to set up a ramp and grab bars, and she had made sure the master bedroom was converted with accessible features. But these were not gestures of love. They were gestures of someone protecting an investment. She did not hold his hand. She did not cry. She did not sit with him through the first night when the phantom pain started, that impossible sensation of feeling his legs despite knowing they were numb, that cruel trick the nervous system plays on the recently paralyzed. Simone was there instead. She appeared around midnight carrying a cup of chamomile tea with honey, the same tea his mother had given him as a child when he couldn't sleep. "Where did you get this?" Marcus had asked, surprised. "I remembered," she had said simply. "You told me once about your mother and this tea. I found a recipe. I hope it helps. She had set the cup on his nightstand, and then she had done something that broke him a little. She had sat in the chair beside his bed, and she had stayed there, quiet and present, until he fell asleep. She didn't talk. She didn't try to comfort him with words. She simply was there, which was exactly what he needed. That became the pattern. Amara grew more distant by the day. She began taking longer trips. First an overnight to Miami for a charity gala, then a week in Montego Bay for a friend's wedding, then 2 weeks in the south of France for a reason she never quite explained. When she was home, she was on her phone constantly, her face lit up by the glow of the screen, her fingers moving rapidly across the touchpad. Marcus watched her with a strange kind of calm now. He was no longer confused about who she was. He was simply gathering evidence, the way a scientist gathers data. Simone, meanwhile, became essential to his life in ways he had never imagined. She helped him with his physical therapy, encouraging him, pushing him when he needed to be pushed, celebrating the small victories like the day he could wheel himself across the room without assistance. She cooked for him not just meals, but the foods he loved, the dishes from his childhood in Lagos, the ones his wife had always said were too smelly, too ethnic, too much. She read to him in the evenings, classics mostly, and history books because Marcus had always loved history but rarely had time to read it. She talked to him about her own life, her own dreams, in a way that made it clear she saw him as a person worth knowing, not a problem to be managed. One night, about 6 weeks after he came home, Simone was helping him prepare for bed. She had developed a routine now, a way of helping him that preserved his dignity, that didn't make him feel helpless even though he absolutely was helpless in certain physical ways. As she was adjusting his pillows, Marcus asked her a question that had been building inside him for weeks. Why do you do this? Why do you take care of me the way you do? You could work anywhere. You could make more money with another family. Why stay? Simone was quiet for a long moment. She finished adjusting the pillows and then she sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair where she sat every night now. Mr. Adeniran, she said finally, in Nigeria where I grew up, there is a saying. Ubuntu, it means I am because we are. Do you understand? Not really, Marcus admitted. It means, she explained, that our humanity is bound up together. That when I see someone suffering, I cannot walk away because their suffering becomes my suffering. When I see someone in need, I cannot ignore them because their need is connected to my purpose. She paused. I take care of you because you are a person worth taking care of. Not because of what you have or what you can do, but because you are here and you are hurting and I have the ability to help. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen since the accident began to thaw. He looked at this woman, this beautiful woman with her simple clothes and her genuine grace, and he understood something about himself that he had been avoiding. He had married Amara because she looked good on his arm and in his bed, but he had never actually loved her. Not the way love was supposed to work. Simone was showing him what he had been missing. The revelation came on a night when Marcus had asked Simone to bring his laptop to his bedroom. He wanted to do some work, just email, just to feel like he still had some control over his life. Simone had positioned the laptop on a special stand they had rigged up, and then she had left to give him privacy. But privacy, as it turned out, was dangerous. Because while Marcus was checking his email, he noticed an unusual charge on one of his credit cards, a withdrawal at an upscale jewelry store in Atlanta. He didn't remember buying jewelry. He pulled up the security footage from that day and watched as his wife walked into that store with a man who was decidedly not him. They held hands. They looked at rings together. They smiled in a way that suggested intimacy, a way that suggested belonging. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled up more security footage, and then his phone records, and then his bank statements. What he found painted a picture he had been too blind to see. Amara had been having an affair for at least 8 months. With her personal trainer, a man 15 years younger, a man with muscles and charm, and none of the responsibilities that came with running a $2-3 billion empire. She had been systematically moving money out of joint accounts into a private account in her name. She had consulted with divorce lawyers, 3 different ones by the look of the meeting notes she had failed to delete from the shared cloud storage. She was planning her exit strategy. She had been planning it even before the accident, but the accident had accelerated the timeline. A paralyzed husband was harder to manage, harder to control, harder to use. Marcus closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his bedroom, the weight of it all pressing down on him. His wife didn't love him. His wife had never loved him. And now that he couldn't walk, she was leaving. The cruel irony was that it didn't hurt as much as he would have expected. The only thing that hurt was the realization that he had wasted years of his life with someone incapable of actual love, and that the woman who had been showing him what love looked like was someone who worked for him, someone he was supposed to employ, and nothing more. There was something he had to do. Something he had been planning in the back of his mind since the day he realized the truth about his wife. He had to understand if Simone's kindness was real or if it was a performance. He had to test her the way he had tested Amara, not to hurt her, but to be absolutely certain. Because if he was going to throw away the life he had built, if he was going to upend everything, he needed to be sure he was doing it for the right reasons. The next morning, Marcus made a phone call to his lawyer. He instructed her to draft a revised will. The new version would leave 75% of his estate to his 3 younger siblings and his aging mother. Amara would receive her settlement, what the prenuptial agreement stipulated, which was substantial but nowhere near the billions she had been expecting. And the remaining 20% would go to his household staff, with specific instructions that their names be made known in the will. He wanted to see how people reacted when they knew they would gain nothing. Then he took a more dramatic step. He called his publicist and instructed her to leak a story to the financial media. The story was carefully crafted to suggest that Marcus's injuries had affected his mental state, that he was no longer able to manage his company effectively, that his doctors had advised him to step back from daily operations. The story suggested that his health was deteriorating, that while the initial reports had said the paralysis was permanent, now there were questions about whether there might be other complications, other health issues that had resulted from the accident. The story was designed to make it seem like Marcus Adeniran was becoming a liability, that his wealth might be in jeopardy, that his days as a titan were over. The financial markets reacted the way Marcus knew they would. His company's stock dropped 8% in a single day. Business partners who had been calling constantly stopped calling. Social invitations dried up. His phone, which had been ringing constantly for 20 years, went nearly silent. And slowly, gradually, the mask came off of everyone around him except one person. Amara's behavior changed dramatically. When she found out about the leak story, when she understood that her husband's wealth might not be as secure as she had assumed, she became cold. Not cold in the way she had been since the accident, which had at least maintained the pretense of being his wife. Now she was openly hostile. She stopped coming home most nights. She was on her phone constantly, and even when she was supposedly with him, her attention was elsewhere. She made comments about his condition, about how depressing it must be for him, about how she didn't know how long she could stay in this situation, about how a man who couldn't even walk couldn't really be a man anymore. Each comment was a blade, but Marcus found he didn't bleed anymore. His heart had already removed itself from the equation. He was simply gathering the last pieces of evidence, the final confirmation that he had been right about her. But Simone remained constant. If anything, she became more attentive. She had not heard the rumors about his health, or if she had, she didn't care. She continued to cook his favorite meals. She continued to sit with him in the garden when the weather allowed it. She continued to help him with his physical therapy, pushing him a little further each day. She continued to treat him with a dignity that suggested she saw him not as a man to be pitied, not as a man whose value had diminished, but as a man worth fighting for. 3 months into his new reality, Marcus decided it was time to push the test to its limit. He called Simone to his office, and he told her something that wasn't true. He told her that his company was filing for bankruptcy protection, that he had made some bad investments, that the paralysis had caused him to lose focus, that he was going to lose most of his fortune. He told her that he would have to let her go, that there wouldn't be money to pay her after the end of the month. He watched her face as he said these things, looking for the disappointment, looking for the moment when she would begin to calculate how to distance herself, looking for the flash of greed or judgment that he had become so good at recognizing in Amara. Instead, Simone's eyes filled with tears, not tears of disappointment, tears of genuine sadness for him. "Oh, Mr. Adeniran," she said, "I am so sorry. That must be so frightening for you." And then she said something that broke his heart in the best possible way. "But please, sir, do not worry about me. I will find another position. What matters now is your well-being. You need someone to help you. You cannot be alone in this. If you cannot afford to pay me, then I will stay anyway. I will find work elsewhere and I will come here in the evenings. I will make sure you are cared for." Marcus stared at her. "You're offering to work for free, while your employer loses his fortune?" "Yes, sir," she said simply. "Because what is money if you have nothing else? What is security if the people you care about are suffering?" She paused. "I made a promise when I took this job. I promised to care for this household and the people in it. That promise didn't come with conditions." Marcus felt something crack open inside him. He had his answer. He had his confirmation. Everything he needed to know about Simone was contained in that one moment, in that willingness to sacrifice her own security for his well-being. He knew now exactly what he had to do. He called his lawyer again. He called his publicist. He called his business manager and his financial advisor. To the lawyer, he said, "Prepare a new will. This time, the primary beneficiary will be Simone Baptiste." To the publicist, he said, "I need to make a public announcement. Tell every news outlet, every financial journalist, every media contact we have that everything they heard was false. My health is stable. My company is more profitable than ever." The story was a test. It was designed to reveal who in my life valued me and who valued my money. To his business manager, he said, "I need to arrange something special, something that shows gratitude." But before all that happened, before the world knew what was coming, before the story broke that would shake Atlanta society to its core, Marcus had to do one more thing. He had to end his marriage. He did it on an evening when Amara finally came home. She came in from one of her outings with her trainer, her hair slightly mussed, her lipstick slightly smudged. She had stopped being subtle about it weeks ago. Marcus was in the living room, waiting for her. He had positioned his wheelchair so that she would have to look at him when she walked in. "We need to talk," he said. Her face flashed with annoyance before she rearranged her features into something more neutral. "Oh, Marcus, I'm exhausted. Can this wait?" "No," he said. "It cannot. It will take 10 minutes. After that, you can go wherever you want." She sat down on the edge of the sofa, positioned like she was ready to flee at any moment. Marcus took a breath. "I know about the affair. I know about the jewelry. I know about the divorce lawyers and the money transfers and the plan to leave me as soon as you thought you could get away with it." Her face went white. She opened her mouth to deny it, but he held up his hand. "I also know that you stopped coming home when you thought I was going to lose my money. I know that you became hostile when you realized my situation might actually be stable. I know, Amara, exactly who you are." Amara's shock lasted about 3 seconds before it turned to anger. "Well, what did you expect? That I would stay with a cripple? That I would spend the rest of my life taking care of you? I didn't sign up for this. I married the CEO of a billion-dollar company, not a broken man in a wheelchair." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm going to make it very easy for you to leave." His divorce settlement, already prepared and filed, was substantially less than she had expected. The prenuptial agreement that she had laughed about 5 years ago when they signed it was about to become her reality. She would walk away with the house, fully paid for, and a lump sum of $5 million. $5 million, which sounded like a lot until you understood that she had expected to inherit at least $15 billion. "I'm contesting this," she said immediately. "My lawyers will tear you apart." "Go ahead," Marcus said calmly, "because I have decided that a leak is going to happen. The same leak that spread rumors about my failing health will spread the truth about your infidelity, your financial manipulation, and your affair with your personal trainer. Every screen in Atlanta will have your face on it, and the headlines will be about the woman who married a man and then abandoned him the moment his circumstances changed. Your father's company depends on reputation and social standing. Yours certainly does. How much do you think $5 million will matter when your friends, your social circle, your professional contacts all know that you're the woman who left her paralyzed husband for a younger man and then tried to take him for everything?" Marcus had never seen his wife's face turn that color. "I hope he was worth it," he said, "because that's all you're going to get from me. And Amara, when you're out of here, the first thing I'm going to do is tell the woman who has actually cared for me over the last 3 months exactly how much I appreciate her." Amara stormed out that night, suitcase hastily packed, already on the phone with her lawyer screaming about the injustice of it all. By the next morning, the story had leaked exactly as promised. By the next evening, her affair with her personal trainer was the most talked-about scandal in Atlanta. By the end of the week, her father's business had lost 3 major clients, and by the end of the month, she had quietly accepted the settlement and signed the papers. But Marcus had bigger plans. He had been planning for this moment for weeks, and he was going to make sure that Simone understood exactly what her kindness, her grace, and her refusal to abandon him had actually cost her. He called her into his office one evening. She came nervously, probably assuming she was about to lose her job, since the bankruptcy story she had been told was now public knowledge. Marcus gestured for her to sit. "Simone, I need to tell you what really happened over the last 3 months." He told her everything. The faked health crisis, the test he had administered to his wife, the fake bankruptcy, the surveillance footage, the affair, all of it. He told her that every story she had heard in the news was either completely false or a carefully orchestrated performance. He told her that he was exactly as wealthy as he had always been. And he told her that her response to his supposed downfall had been the most important data point of his entire life. Simone listened without interrupting, her beautiful face growing more confused as he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You tested me," she said finally, "like you tested your wife." "Yes," Marcus said. "I needed to know if your kindness was real or if it was performance. And Simone, I needed to know because I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Simone's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Adeniran, you can't. I'm your employee. I'm not from your world. I don't have your education or your social status or any of the things that would make sense for someone like you." Marcus leaned forward. "Simone, I don't want any of those things. I want the person who knew how to make chamomile tea with honey when I couldn't sleep. I want the person who cooked me the food of my childhood because she remembered me telling her about it once. I want the person who sat with me through the worst time of my life and asked for nothing in return except the privilege of being useful. That's not a woman of a certain education or status. That's a woman of character. That's a woman whose value has nothing to do with anything except who she is as a human being." "But I can't," she said, and the pain in her voice was real. "I cannot be with you like that. It would be wrong. People would say I took advantage of you, that I seduced you. My name would be destroyed." Marcus smiled. "Not if we do this right. And more importantly, not if my wife's destruction happens in the exact same way." He pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs, financial records, affair documentation, everything she needed to understand that the story about Amara would be publicly known. The narrative will be that the paralyzed billionaire was married to a woman who abandoned him for a younger man and tried to bankrupt him financially. The narrative will be that the woman who stayed, the woman who cared, eventually fell in love with him because she finally understood what love actually means. He paused, and that woman will not be seen as a predator or a seductress. She will be seen as the antidote to a marriage that was poisoned from the start. "No," Simone said, standing up, "I cannot do this. This is too much. He is too rich. I am too poor. The difference is too great, and I will not spend the rest of my life wondering if you ever truly loved me or if you loved the contrast between me and your wife." Marcus expected this. In fact, he had prepared for it. He had a packet prepared, documents drafted by his lawyer. "Simone," he said, "I have set aside a trust fund for you. $500 million. It will be held in your name, independently, with no connection to me or my company. You can access it immediately if you choose, or you can let it grow. The only condition is that you trust me. Trust that I have loved you independent of wealth, that I see you for who you truly are, and that I want to spend my life building something with you that has nothing to do with money." Simone stared at the papers. $500 million? That's more money than most countries have, more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes. "I can't accept this. You're giving me everything." "No," Marcus said, "I'm not giving you everything. I'm giving you choices. I'm giving you the power to walk away from me tomorrow and never have to work again. I'm giving you the security that you gave me when you chose to stay by my side, even when I supposedly had nothing. But most importantly, Simone, I'm giving you the chance to choose me not because you need me, not because you have to, but because you want to." Simone sat back down slowly. She looked at the trust document in her hands, and then she looked at Marcus. What you're asking, she said softly, is for me to believe that love is stronger than difference. That character is more important than status. That I, a simple woman from Nigeria, could matter enough to a powerful man to change his entire life. That's exactly what I'm asking, Marcus said. Because that's exactly what you showed me when I was broken. You showed me that love isn't about equality of circumstances. It's about equality of soul. It's about choosing someone not because they complete you, or because they look good on your arm, or because they increase your wealth or status. It's about choosing someone because their presence makes you better, and because your presence means something to them. Simone stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline, at the city that had been so unwelcoming to her because of her poverty and her accent and her immigrant status. She could have that behind her now. With $500 million, she could own Atlanta instead of working in its kitchens. But that wasn't what made her turn back to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. I will choose you, she said, but not because of the money. I will choose you because I have already fallen in love with you. I fell in love with you when you were supposedly paralyzed and broken, when you had nothing. That was the moment I knew. The moment you most needed someone, and I could actually be that person. The story broke the next morning, and Atlanta society imploded. The headlines were everywhere. Billionaire Marcus Adeniran divorces unfaithful wife after exposing her affair. The emotional and financial cost was extraordinary, and Amara became the villainess of the year. But the second headline, the one that came out that evening, completely overshadowed everything else. Paralyzed tech billionaire announces engagement to household staff member. Marcus Adeniran proposes to longtime employee Simone Baptiste after charity volunteer work brings them close. The story was carefully crafted to show that their relationship had developed naturally, that Marcus had fallen in love with Simone's character, that what had started as employer and employee had evolved into something deeper. Photographs were released showing them together at charity functions, at medical appointments, sitting in the garden together. The backlash was immediate and vicious. How dare he marry someone so far beneath him, people said in the country clubs and the boardrooms and the upscale restaurants. She clearly took advantage of him, others claimed. A man in a wheelchair, vulnerable, dependent on her care, of course she would seduce him. The narrative that Marcus had predicted spread like wildfire through Atlanta's elite. But then something unexpected happened. The general public, the people who didn't have country club memberships or inherited wealth, they saw the story differently. They saw a woman who stayed. They saw a woman who chose a man with disabilities over money and status. They saw the contrast between a beautiful wife who abandoned a man when he became inconvenient and a humble woman who stayed because she cared. The story went viral. Social media exploded with support for Simone. Messages poured in from people who had felt abandoned by those they loved, people who understood what it meant to be discarded when your usefulness diminished. People who celebrated anyone brave enough to choose love over comfort. Marcus's company, instead of suffering from the scandal, actually benefited. His stock price climbed 8% in a single week. Investors who had assumed that his tragedy would hurt business actually saw him as more human, more relatable, more authentic. And the charities that Simone had volunteered with during her time with Marcus suddenly found themselves flush with donations from people inspired by her story. The wedding was small and private, held in a garden overlooking the city. Only their closest loved ones attended. Simone's family came from Nigeria, her mother and father and siblings who wept with joy when they saw her, resplendent in a dress of her own choosing, a fusion of African and American design that represented her journey. Marcus's mother came, and when she saw Simone, she took her hand and whispered something in Yoruba that made both women cry. What did she say? Marcus asked later. She said you saw with your heart instead of your eyes. She said that makes you worthy of my son. And Amara, what happened to her? She faded into obscurity the way public figures often do when the narrative leaves them behind. The personal trainer left her after 3 months when the scandal made it clear she had no money and no status. She tried to resurrect her social standing, tried to repair the damage, but the social circles that had once been her domain had moved on. Last anyone heard, she had moved to California and quietly surrendered to a life of ordinary anonymity. But the story of Marcus and Simone continued. They had children, Two of them, beautiful children who grew up knowing both poverty and wealth, who understood that love wasn't about circumstances, but about character. Simone went back to school because Marcus insisted that she should pursue every dream she had ever harbored. She became a nurse, and she worked in clinics that served poor communities, the same way she had served Marcus, with a grace that suggested she understood that service was its own form of nobility. And Marcus, who had started life as a man who measured worth in dollars and ambition, learned to measure it in moments. In the way Simone's hand felt in his as they watched the sunset. In the way her laugh sounded when something genuinely delighted her. In the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, with a tenderness that suggested she had never stopped seeing him as worthy of love and care, no matter what his legs could or could not do. The lesson of this story, if there is one, is this. The people we marry, the people we choose to build our lives with, they are not reflections of our status or our success. They are reflections of our character. When a man who could have anyone chooses the woman who stayed, the woman who served, the woman who loved him when it cost her something, that tells you everything you need to know about who he is. And when that woman chooses him back, not because of what he can give her, but because of who she knows him to be, that tells you everything you need to know about her. We live in a world that is obsessed with external measures of worth. Your car, your house, your clothes, your job title, your salary. But the real measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching. It's how they treat someone who cannot do anything for them. It's whether they stay or